Every painful thing that ever happened to you was a lesson you refused to learn, gently. That sounds harsh, and it should. Because somewhere inside, you already suspect it's true. You felt the pattern, the same kind of loss, the same kind of betrayal, the same wall you keep walking into. By the end of this, you'll understand the mechanism behind that pattern and how to step out of it permanently. Charles Haanel wrote the Master Key System in 1912, and buried inside its 24 weekly lessons is one of the most uncomfortable spiritual truths ever committed to paper. Nature demands growth. Every living thing either expands or begins to die. There is no pause button, no holding pattern. The oak tree doesn't get to stay an acorn because it's comfortable underground. And neither do you. But Haanel went further than most teachers dared. He said you get exactly 2 roads to that growth. The first is wisdom, conscious, deliberate expansion through understanding. The second is suffering, and if you refuse the first, the universe will hand you the second without asking permission. Think about that in your own life. Every area where you've grown the most, was it because you sat down one day and chose to evolve? Or was it because something broke so badly that staying the same became more painful than changing? Most people, if they're honest, will admit it was the second. The crisis, the diagnosis, the phone call at 2 in the morning, the relationship that finally collapsed under the weight of everything left unsaid. That pattern has a name in Haanel's system. He calls it the law of growth, and it operates with the same indifference as gravity. Gravity doesn't care whether you respect it, step off a ledge, and the consequence arrives regardless of your opinion. Growth works the same way. The universe has a direction for you. Move with it or get dragged. So why do most people choose suffering? They don't choose it consciously. They choose comfort, which looks like the opposite of suffering, but functions as its delivery system. You stay in the job that's slowly hollowing you out. You avoid the conversation that would change everything. You keep the belief that stopped serving you years ago because replacing it would mean admitting you were wrong. Comfort is the anesthetic. Suffering is the surgery that follows when the anesthetic wears off. Haanel described the mind as a garden in Part 3 of the Master Key System. Every thought you plant grows. Every thought you neglect to weed grows too, just in a direction you didn't choose. The person who refuses to consciously direct their thinking isn't avoiding the work of mental cultivation. They're still cultivating, they're just growing weeds and wondering why the harvest tastes bitter. Here's where this gets personal. You can probably identify the area of your life where you've been coasting, the place where you've been telling yourself, it's fine, while something inside you tightens every time you say it. That tightness is the early signal. Haanel would call it the whisper before the shout. Wisdom means listening to the whisper. Suffering means waiting for the shout. The difference between the two paths isn't the destination. Both lead to growth, both lead to expansion. The difference is the cost. Growth through wisdom costs you comfort. Growth through suffering costs you time, health, relationships, and sometimes parts of yourself you can never recover. The math is brutal. A small, voluntary discomfort now versus an involuntary catastrophe later. And yet, knowing this, most people will still choose to wait. Why? Because the ego has a vested interest in the current arrangement. Haanel understood this a century before modern psychology gave it clinical language. The ego treats change as death. Every identity you've built, I'm the responsible one. I'm the one who keeps the peace. I'm the one who doesn't need help. Those identities are fortresses. They were useful once, maybe when you were 7 and the world required a certain version of you to survive. But the fortress that protected the child is now the prison that suffocates the adult. Growth through wisdom means voluntarily dismantling those walls, brick by brick, sitting with the discomfort of not knowing who you are without them. Haanel's weekly exercises were designed for exactly this. Each lesson asks you to hold a single idea in your mind with absolute concentration, not for hours, but for minutes. The practice sounds simple. Try it. Sit in a chair, close your eyes, and hold one thought, just one, for 15 minutes without your mind wandering to your grocery list or that thing someone said last Tuesday. You'll discover how little control you actually have over your own mind. And that discovery, while humbling, is the first authentic step on the wisdom path. The suffering path skips this humility. It arrives uninvited, breaks something you were attached to, and forces the same realization that you weren't in control, but at a much higher price. The lesson is identical. The tuition is different. Hanel wrote something in part 15 that deserves to be read slowly. He said that difficulties and obstacles are necessary for wisdom and spiritual growth. The key word is necessary. He didn't say optional. He didn't say occasional. Necessary. The question is whether you meet those difficulties as a student who chose the curriculum or as someone who got pulled out of bed for a pop quiz at midnight. There's a practical discipline buried in this teaching that most readers miss. Hanel's system requires you to sit with the growth edge daily, to identify with honesty the place where you're resisting expansion, then to mentally rehearse the expanded version of yourself, to see it, feel it, and assume it as already real. This is the wisdom path in action. You're volunteering for the discomfort of becoming before life forces it on you. Consider what happens when you refuse. The relationship you know needs to end, but you stay in out of fear. Eventually, it ends anyway, but messily, with damage that spills onto people who didn't deserve it. The health habit you know matters, but you keep postponing. Eventually, your body issues an ultimatum that doesn't come with a negotiation period. The creative work you've been sitting on for years because you're afraid it won't be good enough. Eventually, the regret of never trying becomes its own kind of suffering. Quieter, but just as corrosive. Hanel saw these patterns as mechanical. Nature doesn't punish you for refusing to grow. Nature simply continues its process, and you experience the friction of being dragged along a path you could have walked. A river doesn't punish a boulder for sitting in its way. The water simply goes around it, and over decades, the boulder is worn smooth whether it wanted to be or not. The only question is whether you flow with the current or get eroded by it. One of the most overlooked aspects of Hanel's system is his insistence that this growth is joyful when chosen consciously. He wasn't describing a grim march of self-improvement. He was describing the natural pleasure of a mind expanding into its full capacity. A plant doesn't suffer when it grows toward sunlight. Growth is what it was designed for. The suffering only enters when something blocks the light, and the plant contorts itself trying to reach it anyway. You've felt this. Remember a time when you finally made the change you'd been avoiding, the conversation you dreaded, that turned out to be a doorway, the move to a new city that terrified you but cracked your world open, the old belief you released, and the rush of lightness that followed. That lightness is what Hanel means by growth through wisdom. The change itself was uncomfortable. The result was freedom. So here is the practice, stripped to its bones. Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself one question. Where am I resisting growth right now? Be specific, give it a name. The job, the relationship, the belief, the habit, the conversation. Then sit with the expanded version of yourself, the one who already moved through that resistance. Feel what that person feels. Breathe the way that person breathes. Hanel's entire system rests on this principle. The mind that consistently holds an image of expansion will eventually produce the conditions to match it. The mind that refuses will still grow, but through friction, through loss, through the slow grinding of circumstances that force what could have been chosen freely. The whisper is speaking to you right now. It's been speaking for a while. You've heard it in the quiet moments between distractions, in the slight unease that shows up when everything is supposedly fine. That whisper is wisdom, offering you the gentle path. The only question worth asking tonight is whether you'll listen before it becomes a shout.